In the vast, windswept expanse of the North African desert, a little-known fact often surprises even dedicated students of World War II. When the Special Air Service first emerged in 1941, it was not yet a legendary unit, it was an experiment. A desperate gamble born from the chaos of the early Desert War. In these early months, before fame and formal recognition, several original volunteers carried out missions so dangerous and so deeply isolated that some of their names never appeared in the regiment's official post-war history. Their stories exist only in scattered notes, smudged field reports, and the memories of men who survived the impossible. The struggle began with the brutal realities of desert warfare. Temperatures swung from blistering days to freezing nights, sandstorms erased entire tracks within minutes, and even the best navigation officers could find themselves disoriented among endless dunes. Early SAS teams, operating in 2 or 3 vehicle detachments, often pushed more than 250 miles behind Axis lines with nothing but maps, compasses, and a hope that their modified Willis Jeeps would hold together long enough to get them home. These first small patrols frequently consisted of 4 to 6 men, handpicked for endurance, initiative, and an almost reckless willingness to do what others considered impossible. They were tasked with sabotaging airfields, fuel depots, and supply lines deep within territory held by Rommel's Afrika Korps. Among these early volunteers were several men now largely forgotten. Corporal Arthur Jack Linton, Sergeant Norman Webb, Trooper Billy Frazier, and others whose names surfaced only briefly in wartime diaries. They participated in some of the earliest SAS raids in late 1941, when David Sterling, still a relatively unknown officer, was experimenting with the idea of striking fast, disappearing into the desert, and crippling the German war machine from the inside. The risks were staggering. Any breakdown, any wrong turn, any encounter with an Italian patrol could mean death or permanent disappearance. Insight into their missions emerges from Sterling's own notes, written in a tight, controlled script. Small teams offer the greatest promise. Maximum effect, minimum signature. Another entry, dated November 1941, adds, "Men must accept the likelihood that rescue is impossible." These lines shed light on the grim reality. The SAS was sending men into situations where the most probable outcome was that they would simply vanish. Such disappeared teams were often logged as missing in action, with no follow-up made possible due to the shifting nature of desert warfare. Stories from these early patrols often blend into myth because so few first-hand accounts survived. One such episode likely involved Linton's detachment during a strike near Jallo Oasis. A fragmentary report from December 1941 describes a team that successfully detonated fuel drums and damaged aircraft before attempting the long, silent journey back towards Siwa. They were last seen heading north in 2 trucks carrying captured Italian fuel. A sandstorm swept across the region that same night. When the storm cleared, no trace of them could be found. No wreckage. No footprints. No abandoned supplies. The desert simply reclaimed them. The reveal comes through scattered intelligence files pulled together after the war. One British reconnaissance pilot reported spotting what appeared to be 2 burned-out vehicles partially buried in sand, roughly 70 miles from their planned route. The sighting was never confirmed, no recovery mission followed. Another German logbook entry discovered in 1946 mentioned a brief skirmish with unknown raiders in that same region, but the coordinates did not match. These contradictions leave historians with an unsettling question. Were these early SAS pioneers overtaken by the desert, intercepted by an Axis patrol, or forced deep into the dunes by mechanical failure until water and time ran out? These mysteries echo into the modern era, offering a sobering application for today's special operations community. The earliest SAS teams remind us that unconventional warfare has always demanded absolute commitment, and has always carried the possibility that operators may be lost beyond any hope of recovery. In the world of covert missions, the line between heroism and disappearance is perilously thin. The closing note is a whisper of unresolved tension. Because in the founding months of the SAS, at least a handful of men disappeared without record, without ceremony, and without closure. Their names faded from official documentation as the unit grew in fame and scale. Yet their early sacrifices, carved into the sand and erased just as quickly, created the foundation upon which the regiment built its fearsome reputation. And their unresolved fates raise one final haunting question. If these were only the first, how many more would follow as the SAS expanded its reach across North Africa and beyond? In the final months of 1942, while the world's attention focused on the sweeping tank battles around El Alamein, a quieter yet equally significant struggle unfolded far behind the German front lines. Few realize that during this period, the SAS, still small, still largely experimental, launched some of its most daring operations against Luftwaffe airfields along the Libyan coast. One such mission, a coordinated strike on installations near Benghazi, involved a 5-man detachment whose disappearance remains one of the regiment's earliest and most enduring mysteries. Their actions were overshadowed by the grander maneuvers of the North African campaign, yet their story captures the raw peril of deep penetration warfare. The struggle began long before the team even reached enemy territory. Moving through the desert in November 1942 meant surviving blistering heat, limited water, and the ever-present risk of breakdowns. The patrol, composed of Sergeant Michael Warren, Corporal Ted Merrick, Trooper Alan Carr, Trooper Frank Howes, and Lance Corporal David Kinney, traveled in 2 modified Chevrolet trucks borrowed from the Long Range Desert Group, LRDG. Their objective was precise: infiltrate the Benghazi sector, destroy fuel depots feeding the Luftwaffe's air operations, and escape unnoticed before German patrols could respond. As the team pushed westward, the terrain became more treacherous. Hard-packed ridges gave way to soft sand belts that swallowed tires, and even at night, when they moved under the cover of darkness, German reconnaissance aircraft sometimes circled unexpectedly overhead. A rare diary entry from Captain John Tonkin of the LRDG, dated November 18, 1942, captures this tension. The Warren party set off in high spirits, but with an awareness that their margin for error was small. Fuel is tight, and the region ahead is alive with patrols. His words hinted at the fragility of these missions. One wrong decision could turn a tactical raid into an unrecoverable loss. The actual strike near Benghazi was executed with precision. According to an Allied intelligence summary created weeks later, the team successfully infiltrated the perimeter of an airfield near Ben Aina under the cover of a moonless sky. Using time charges, they ignited at least 3 fuel dumps and damaged several parked aircraft. The Germans reported the attack in their own fragmented logs, albeit dismissively, calling it the work of saboteurs of unknown origin. Warren and his men slipped back into the desert before the flames had even begun to recede. The reveal and the beginning of the mystery occurred the following morning. A South African Air Force reconnaissance pilot flying near the region where the team was expected to begin its withdrawal spotted 2 abandoned vehicles partially concealed behind a low dune. No figures were seen. No signal panels. No movement. The aircraft circled twice, but sand interfered with visibility, and the pilot assumed the vehicles belonged to Italian survey teams. Only later, when Warren's patrol failed to report to the predetermined rendezvous point at Wadi El Farek, did the possibility arise that these were the missing SAS trucks. Allied command launched limited aerial searches over the next 2 days, but fuel shortages and shifting priorities meant no ground expedition could be spared. A terse entry from the headquarters war diary on November 27 reads, "Warren patrol overdue. No contact. Presumed lost or captured." But subsequent German records provide no confirmation of any prisoners taken in that region during the time frame. This absence is one of the most confounding elements. For an Axis force that meticulously documented captured enemy raiders, there was not a single mention of the 5-man team. The deeper investigators dug after the war, the more contradictory the pieces became. An Italian officer interviewed in 1946 recalled seeing burned-out lorries, clearly British, but placed them more than 40 miles from the airfield. A Bedouin tribesman later provided a statement claiming he encountered a group of foreign soldiers traveling on foot toward the interior, exhausted and low on water. The distances in these accounts conflict. The timelines don't align. No remains, equipment or weapons were ever recovered. Modern analysts reviewing the case often point to several possible explanations, none entirely satisfying. A catastrophic mechanical failure could have stranded the patrol, leading them to attempt an on-foot escape in conditions that made survival nearly impossible. A surprise Axis patrol might have overwhelmed them, with the men killed and the incident lost among incomplete wartime records. Or perhaps they were simply devoured by the desert itself, the sand burying all traces within hours, as it had done to other vehicles and entire encampments throughout the conflict. The application for modern special operations is clear. Even the best-trained teams operating in remote environments remain vulnerable to geography, isolation, and chance. The Warren Patrol's disappearance underscores the harsh truth that not all wartime losses can be neatly explained, even decades later. And so Part 2 ends on an uneasy note. A 5-man SAS team executed one of the most successful early strikes of the North African campaign, only to vanish into the vast, shifting desert before they could return home. Their mission is recorded, their fate is not. And as the war moved into Europe, the dangers facing SAS teams only grew more complex, setting the stage for even darker mysteries in the mountains and forests beyond the Mediterranean. In the winter of 1943, as the Italian campaign ground forward through snow-covered mountains and battered medieval towns, a lesser-known chapter of the SAS unfolded far from the major offensives. Few realized that even as Allied troops fought through Salerno, Naples, and Cassino, small SAS teams were parachuting into Italy's remote interior to organize resistance, disrupt supply lines, and prepare the country for liberation from within. One such team, inserted into the rugged Abruzzo region, would become one of the war's most perplexing disappearances, an operation scattered by weather, divided by geography, and ultimately swallowed by the chaos of enemy territory. The struggle began on a moonlit night in late November 1943, when a four-man detachment from 2 SAS took off from a Royal Air Force airfield in southern Italy. Their mission was designated as a liaison and sabotage operation: establish contact with local anti-fascist groups, survey German troop movements along the Rome-Pescara corridor, and cut key communication lines feeding the German defensive network. The team, Lieutenant Robert Hale, Sergeant Colin Reeves, Trooper James Jimmy Malloy, and radio operator Peter Vance, carried only light weapons, demolition kits, and a single radio set wrapped in waxed canvas. Their success depended entirely on surprise and stealth. However, as the converted Halifax aircraft approached the drop zone near the Gran Sasso Massif, sudden storms swept across the mountains. Winds pushed the aircraft off course, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The jump light turned green regardless. The crew had no choice. One after another, the men leapt into a violent downdraft that scattered their parachutes across miles of broken terrain. This moment, just a few seconds in their descent, would be the last time Allied eyes ever saw the team together. Insight into what followed comes from Italian partisan accounts recorded months later. Several villagers in the tiny hamlet of Santo Stefano di Cessaneo recalled seeing parachutes drifting at dawn, caught on trees and rocky outcrops. One elderly shepherd described finding a torn canopy near a frozen ridge but no sign of the soldier who had worn it. Another report noted gunfire echoing in the valley that same afternoon, though no one could determine who had fired first. When Allied headquarters later reviewed these statements, inconsistencies made it difficult to determine whether the shots were from German patrols or simply echoes from distant fighting. Hale likely survived the landing. A partisan ledger from the region includes an entry that may reference him: unofficial Inglese ferito alla gamba chiedeva acqua. An English officer wounded in the leg asked for water. The entry, dated only December, offers no further detail. Whether he was sheltered, moved, or later captured is unknown. The German presence in Abruzzo intensified following increased partisan activity, and the region's winding passes were routinely patrolled by elements of the 114th Jaeger Division. Any wounded commando would have faced near impossible odds of evasion. The reveal of the operation's unraveling emerges from a damaged radio log recovered after the war. Written on thin waxed paper, it contained half a message believed to be from Vance: scattered, cannot locate others, movement in valley, will attempt. The transmission cut off abruptly. No further signals were ever received. The team's radio frequency was monitored daily for the next 2 weeks. Nothing but static answered. Post-war investigations tried to rebuild the team's fate from fragments. A German police unit recorded the capture of 2 English saboteurs near Bresciano around that time, but the description did not match Hale's team. Another local account spoke of a firefight near Rocca Calascio, in which foreign soldiers were seen exchanging fire before disappearing into a pine forest. A partisan survivor later stated that he heard foreign accents during the clash, but could not confirm if they were English, Polish, or even German mountain troops. The deeper historians looked, the more the facts dissolved into contradiction. If the team scattered on landing, each man may have faced an entirely different fate. One captured, one killed, one sheltered briefly, one lost in the mountains. With winter snows closing the passes and German reprisals increasing, entire partisan villages were uprooted or abandoned. Any trace left by the SAS team, footprints, blood trails, or cached equipment, could have been obliterated within days. Modern military analysts reflect on the operation as a stark reminder of the thin line Special Operations Forces walk when inserted deep into hostile terrain with limited support. In mountainous regions where weather, geography, and enemy patrols combine, even the best-planned missions can fracture in minutes. The loss of Hale's team underscores the vulnerability that comes with isolation and the ease with which a single storm can undo months of meticulous preparation. The part closes in somber uncertainty. No bodies were recovered. no dog tags, no equipment. The Abruzzo mission simply faded into the fog of war, leaving behind only a handful of contradictory testimonies and a half-finished radio message. As Allied operations intensified across Europe, more SAS teams would face similar risks, some returning with tales of narrow escape, others vanishing into forests and fields where their stories remain untold. The next chapter leads to France, where the war's deadliest years for the SAS were yet to come. By the summer of 1944, as Allied armies advanced from the Normandy beaches into the heart of occupied France, a hidden war unfolded behind German lines, one fought by small, isolated teams whose missions rarely made headlines. One little-known fact remains staggering. During this period, SAS operators working on sabotage missions in western France faced one of the highest fatality and disappearance rates of any British Special Forces unit of the war. Nowhere was this risk more tragically realized than in Operation Bulbasket, an SAS-led mission near Poitiers and Châtellerault aimed at crippling the German V-1 flying bomb supply chain. Here, in the thick forests and rural farmsteads of the Vienne, entire teams vanished, some confirmed executed, others lost without a trace. The struggle began in June 1944, when one SAS was tasked with a high-priority order: prevent German reinforcements and fuel supplies from reaching the northern rail networks that fed the V-1 launch sites. A 60-man detachment under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Brian Franks parachuted into the region between 6 to 7 June. Their role was to sabotage railways, ambush convoys, and coordinate with French resistance fighters. Among the force were smaller breakup patrols, 3 to 5-man teams scattered across farms, woodlands, and abandoned quarries, where they operated with almost no external support. But the environment was brutally unforgiving. German presence in the area had intensified after the D-Day landings, and elements of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, Gotz von Berlichingen, patrolled roads day and night. Complicating matters further, the SAS teams relied on irregular supply drops, and fog frequently delayed aircraft. Their survival depended on concealment and trust in the local French maquis, trust that would later be tested to its limit. Insight into the mission's precarious situation comes from the diary of Corporal Ernest Bishop, part of one of the dispersed sabotage teams. In an entry dated June 14, he wrote, "Enemy columns everywhere. We are phantoms among them. Supplies short. If the weather denies us another drop, our situation becomes grave." He also mentioned the increasing tension caused by German sweep operations after the Maquis ambushed a convoy near La Roche-Posay. These sweeps forced many SAS patrols to relocate every night, leaving them exhausted, hungry, and often separated from the larger force. The reveal of how dangerously exposed the operation had become came on June 20th, when a German patrol discovered one of the SAS camps hidden in a wooded area north of Verrières. Several operators were captured alive, including men from the smaller sabotage teams. According to post-war testimonies, the Germans were surprised by the equipment they seized: British uniforms, wireless sets, demolition kits, all clear evidence that these were not resistance fighters but Allied special forces. This discovery changed everything. The captured men were turned over to the Sicherheitsdienst SD, not treated as prisoners of war. And this is where the mystery deepens. While many of the captured SAS operatives were executed by the Gestapo and later exhumed from mass graves near Saint-Savant and Rome, the fate of several smaller detachments remains uncertain. German records confirm at least 34 executions, but the operations roster tells a darker story. At least a handful of SAS troopers from the outlying patrols were never accounted for, their final movements recorded only in fragments. One such case involves a 3-man group: Sergeant Raymond Bowden, Trooper Hugh Martin, and Trooper Leonard Sharp, last seen near a railway line southeast of Poitiers. They had successfully disrupted a German fuel convoy earlier in the week, then disappeared while attempting to link up with the main camp. A resistance report claims that German trucks were seen carrying bound prisoners through a nearby village, yet no execution records match their descriptions. A later RAF aerial reconnaissance photo taken on July 3 shows what appear to be 2 bodies near a ditch outside Marigny-Brézy, but the remains were never formally identified. The application for modern special operations offers a sobering lesson. Small, scattered teams cut off from their command network face immense vulnerability when enemy units quickly adapt. Operation Bulbasket illustrates how intelligence breakthroughs, like the Germans' realization that these were not partisans but British special forces, can instantly transform captured operators from POWs into targets for unlawful execution. But Operation Bulbasket also leaves questions that still linger in military archives. Why were some teams found and documented, while others vanished entirely? Did unrecorded firefights occur in remote farm valleys, their casualties buried anonymously? Were some captured men transported elsewhere before their executions, lost in the confusion of retreating German units? Or did certain detachments perish in areas never searched after the war? The part closes with the haunting truth. Even in an operation as well studied as Bulbasket, shadows remain. Some SAS men have named graves. Others have only empty lines in the unit's after-action reports. As the war pushed toward its final year, the SAS would face even greater peril in the forests of eastern France, where entire patrols disappeared under the pressure of German counterinsurgency, setting the stage for the losses that defined Operation Leuton. By late 1944, as Allied forces pushed toward Germany's border, another battle unfolded far from the major headlines, one fought in the dense forests, steep valleys, and fog-shrouded ridges of the Vosges Mountains in eastern France. A little-known fact underscores the danger of this moment. The loss rate for SAS personnel during Operation Leuton was among the highest of any British special operation conducted on European soil. What began as an ambitious attempt to ignite large-scale resistance and block German reinforcements soon descended into a desperate fight for survival, where entire patrols were hunted, cut off, and ultimately erased in the chaos of German counteractions. Among these lost teams were several men whose final moments remain unrecorded to this day. The struggle began in August 1944, when a detachment from 2 SAS under Major Brian Franks parachuted into the Vosges with a bold objective: disrupt German troop withdrawals, support the advancing U.S. 7th Army, and prepare the region for a rapid Allied breakthrough toward the Rhine. The terrain was unforgiving, thick pine forests, steep ravines, and scattered hamlets that became treacherous under sudden autumn storms. Worse still, the German presence was unexpectedly strong. Elements of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division, Gotz von Berlichingen, and security police units had regrouped there, making the region far more dangerous than Allied intelligence had predicted. SAS teams began conducting ambushes, sabotage raids, and reconnaissance missions, often working in close partnership with the French resistance of the Maquis du Bandisapt. Yet the challenges mounted quickly. Supplies were scarce, communications unreliable, and German patrols increasingly aggressive. Corporal Harry Bunce recorded the unit's anxiety in a diary entry dated September 14. Enemy movements heavy. Radios weak. Drop zones compromised. We are operating blind amid forces we cannot yet count. His words captured the essence of Leuton's problem. The SAS was deep behind enemy lines with uncertain support and diminishing resources. Then came the reveal of just how perilous the situation had become. In mid-September, a series of German sweeps encircled key SAS hideouts. Acting on intelligence gathered from captured resistance members, German troops began tightening a ring around the scattered British patrols. Roadblocks appeared on mountain passes. Observation posts covered the valleys. The once open routes used by the SAS became lethal traps. Several patrols managed to slip away temporarily, retreating deeper into the forests, but their ability to regroup diminished by the day. One patrol, consisting of Lieutenant Andrew Sutherland, Sergeant Frederick Nash, Trooper William Hardy, and Trooper Peter Calder, was last seen near Moussy on September 19. According to local accounts, the men attempted to break through German lines after hearing gunfire from nearby ridges. A villager later claimed they were briefly sheltered in a barn on the outskirts of town, but German troops were sweeping the area. That night, the 4 men slipped into the forest, heading east toward the Bruche Valley. No Allied or civilian witness ever saw them again. German records shed limited light. A post-war interrogation of an SS officer provided one cryptic line: English commandos were taken, questioned, and transported. But no such prisoners appeared in any POW roster. Another fragmentary document from the Sicherheitspolizei security police referenced 4 enemy agents detained, though the location and final disposition were never specified. This ambiguity leaves historians with an unsettling question. Were Sutherland's men executed in secret, transported to another region, or perhaps killed during an unrecorded firefight in the wooded highlands? Even the SAS headquarters struggled to understand the true scale of the disaster unfolding. The weather-grounded resupply aircraft, fuel shortages prevented larger airborne support operations, and several scheduled extraction missions had to be abandoned. For the patrols still hiding in the Vosges, survival became a day-to-day calculation. Some attempted daring treks toward Allied lines. Others hid in shepherd huts or caves, rationing their meager supplies while German patrols combed the mountains with dogs. One resistance member recalled hearing shots at dawn for several days after the encirclement, though he could not confirm whether these were executions, skirmishes, or simply German troops training in the forests. Modern military analysts often highlight Operation Leuton as a case study in the vulnerabilities of special operations cut off from their support network. The SAS teams were skilled, experienced, and determined, yet geography, intelligence failures, and an unexpectedly strong enemy presence created conditions from which few could escape. Leuton is frequently cited in contemporary doctrine as an example of how quickly a deep insertion force can shift from offensive capability to survival mode when the operational environment deteriorates. The operation's ending remains heavy with loss. Many SAS personnel captured during Leuton were executed by the Gestapo at Schirmeck or Strasbourg, their names later recovered through painstaking post-war investigations. But others, including the Sutherland Patrol and several smaller, isolated teams, remain classified as missing. Their bodies were never recovered. Their last radio transmissions, if sent at all, were lost to static. Their final movements exist only as faint footprints on forest paths long reclaimed by moss and pine needles. And so Part 5 closes with the somber truth that some of the most skilled commandos of Britain's wartime forces vanished in the fog of the Vosges, their stories fragmented, their sacrifices largely unknown. Their disappearance set the stage for the final chapter, a post-war reckoning with missing men and the lingering shadows left by the SAS secret missions as the conflict neared its end. As 1945 approached, the world's attention shifted toward collapsing German defenses, liberated capitals, and the promise of a war soon to end. Yet behind the sweeping headlines lay a quieter, more complicated truth. Many of the elite special forces who had operated in the shadows for years never returned home, and their stories remained buried beneath wartime secrecy and fragmented archival records. A little-known fact underscores the depth of this silence. By the war's close, several SAS patrols were still listed as missing, with no confirmed grave locations, no captured records, and no surviving eyewitnesses. For these 5 forgotten groups of SAS heroes, the closing months of World War II brought not resolution, but a deepening mystery that would persist well into the post-war era. The struggle at this stage was no longer defined by active operations alone, but by uncertainty, absence, and the agonizing work of trying to reconstruct what had happened in the chaos of occupied Europe. Families received sparse telegrams. Commanders wrote to ministries seeking information they did not have. The SAS, still officially a secret unit in many respects, lacked the bureaucratic machinery to trace every patrol that had vanished behind enemy lines. Meanwhile, Allied investigators arriving in liberated areas found incomplete German records, documents hastily burned, lost during retreats, or scattered across multiple commands that had no standard reporting practice for Special Forces operatives. The insight into this difficult period comes from the work of the Special Operations Executive, SOE, and the Judge Advocate General's War Crimes Section, both of which attempted to trace missing Allied operatives in 1945 and 1946. Their files reveal just how complicated the task was. A 1946 memo from the War Crimes Section notes, the identities of several British soldiers, believed to be SAS, cannot be confirmed. Multiple units operated in civilian garments or mixed dress. Only fragments of equipment remain. This entry, while administrative in tone, highlights a critical obstacle. SAS operators often fought in a blend of British uniforms, resistance clothing, and sometimes German or civilian coats to blend into local environments. Without dog tags and often stripped of their equipment upon capture, they became nearly impossible to identify once killed. The reveal of how extensive the uncertainty had become emerged through interviews and field investigations across France, Italy, and Germany. In western France, villagers recalled fleeting encounters with exhausted British saboteurs who disappeared after brief firefights or hurried attempts to evade encirclement. In Italy, partisan leaders spoke of English soldiers aiding mountain operations, men whose names they never learned, whose fates they never witnessed. Some accounts mentioned firefights where foreign soldiers were overwhelmed and taken away in trucks, but the destinations were unknown. In other cases, investigators found graves marked simply "Unknown British Soldier," with no clear connection to the missing SAS personnel. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the post-war search was the repeated discovery of incomplete truths. In the Vosges, investigators found records confirming the executions of several SAS operators taken during Operation Leuton, yet other identified patrols had no surviving documentation at all, no German reports, no captured correspondence, no witness statements. In northern Italy, a partisan group insisted they had guided a wounded British officer to safety, but could not recall his name or whether he ultimately reached Allied lines. The contradictions piled up. One witness insisted a missing patrol had been captured. Another swore they saw the same men fighting days later. Without clear evidence, the fate of these men dissolved into overlapping memories and partial stories that refused to align. Modern military historians and analysts view this period as a sobering reflection of the limitations of wartime record-keeping. Special operations, by their nature, operate in fluid environments where documentation is sparse, and missions depend on secrecy. During the final years of the war, as fronts shifted rapidly and occupations collapsed, many units simply did not have the time or ability to maintain coherent records. This reality offers an important application for today's Special Forces community. Even the most expertly executed missions can disappear beneath the fog of war if the operational environment degrades and documentation becomes unreliable. Modern doctrines for personnel recovery and tracking owe much to lessons drawn from the disappeared SAS teams of World War II. Yet even with decades of research, the emotional weight of these stories persists. For the families, closure came slowly, sometimes never. Regimental historians spent years piecing together fragments from diaries, resistance testimonies, and declassified intelligence files, hoping to honor men whose contributions were overshadowed by larger battles and political events. In some cases, memorials now stand where their remains were never found, quiet markers in forests, hillsides, and village squares across Europe. These sites serve not only as remembrance, but as symbols of the countless wartime stories left incomplete. And so Part 6 closes the overarching narrative with a lingering sense of unresolved history. The 5 forgotten SAS groups, those lost in the North African sands, the mountains of Abruzzo, the forests of western France, and the ridges of the Vosges, represent a hidden legacy within the broader World War II story. Their missions succeeded, their lives were cut short, their endings remained shrouded in uncertainty. These men operated in the shadows, and in a way they remain there, heroes whose ultimate resting places may never be known. Yet their courage, sacrifice, and disappearance form an essential part of understanding the true cost of the silent war fought far behind enemy lines.